flavor for your ear. Epic Spotlight. Putting the spotlight on positive goings on the real people that have chosen a real path. The who's, the whys, and the hows are being shared and given to you.
And we're back, and we got another one. But before we get going, we got to take care of some housekeeping notes. This episode today is sponsored by Epic Mortgage. Whether you're buying, refinancing, or investing, call Epic today. That's 708-905-5300. That's 708-905-5300. It's your dreams, your goals. Let's plan together. Now on with the show. Today we have two. Better than one. We're going to dive into the impact of ESG mandates on capitalism, business, and personal finance with two expert guests. First off, we have David Prescott. He's a seasoned geologist and environmental consultant with over 30 years of experience, a licensed professional geologist in Texas and Wyoming. He specializes in groundwater protection, soil remediation, and regulatory compliance, advocating for the market-driven sustainability. And next we have Michael Ashley. He's a former Disney story consultant, a Chapman University screenwriting professor, and the author of over 20 books, including Own the AI Revolution, a top business book of 2019. As a columnist for Forbes and Entrepreneur, he's a thought teacher on AI innovation and media. Together, they have co-authored Creative Destruction, How ESG Mandates Are Destroying Capitalism, Costing You Money, and Wrecking America. And today they'll share their insights on ESG, capitalism, energy, and AI. Welcome, David and Michael.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Well, thanks for coming on. No, I appreciate it. No, this is an interesting topic for me, and I want to get to know a little bit better. But, you know, through your book, it takes us through a critical stance of ESG and just different mandates. Just for the audience, can you briefly touch upon just what is ESG and what do you believe is harming capitalism?
Well, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And the case that we're making in this book is that ESG is not unlike the social credit score in China, except the difference is that that is occurring to individuals in that country, and it is occurring to businesses in our own country. And so under the idea that companies need to comply and adhere to these type of issues, they are being exploited, and essentially they are being forced into decisions that go against their business model. So for instance, whether it's Vanguard or BlackRock, they're able to tell businesses who should be on their board. They're able to tell them what they should do in terms of their environmental policies and even social justice causes. Although we believe in the idea of doing well and taking care of our planet and taking care of our fellow human beings, we don't want to be told what to do. That goes against the American model. Instead, businesses should be free to make their own decisions and should not be held captive by very strong private and public partnerships that undermine the meritocracy that we enjoy so much in America.
Oh, that's a great answer. I know it's the three P's, right, that we try to people, prosperity, and the planet. I mean, at least that's the concept. So how are ESG policies costing everyday American people?
Well, I can answer that. You know, when we go and going back to what Michael said, how many people know what ESG stands for and what ESG is? And it's resounding that 95% of the population is not familiar with these mandates that are driving forward SEC rule changes and affecting our retirement and things like that. So how is ESG affecting the normal person, right? That was the question, right? So in many ways, ESG is when you're a retiree. One of our chapters in the book, The Retiree That Never Was, it's a lady that has invested heavily and saved her whole life, ready to open up a flower shop. And someone comes to her and says, well, hey, you know, the best funds are ESG funds. And don't you want to protect the planet while investing money? And she thinks, yeah, that's a great thing. And so she ends up putting all of her money into a solar farm or, you know, large wind turbines to power, you know, wind energy. And all of those things are good, but are they performing as well as potentially a Chevron energy stock or an Oxy stock? And so she's bought into this ESG funding mechanism or this investment mechanism, and the individuals selling her that are losing their sight in their fiduciary responsibility. And we see always, what is the company's ESG score? Well, it doesn't really matter what their ESG score is. For the retiree and us as investors, we want to see what their return is. Are they maximizing the return so we can retire comfortably? And is there a lot of stability in those funds? Is there stability in those funds? And oftentimes there's not. Most of the times the energy companies are producing better returns, which ultimately, if you want to invest in that thing, that is the number one goal of a retiree. So by being told that this is what we're supposed to do and being led down this path of, hey, you're helping the planet, but your returns are substandard, that is not what we should do. We've seen 28, I think at this point, maybe even 29 states that have sued against ESG funded companies, that if a teacher retirement goes into a BlackRock, and all BlackRock is doing is funding ESG based stocks, they're not doing their fiduciary duty of bringing the maximum return. And we've seen a really large shift just recently in a lot of these companies backing off of ESG, as we've seen the DEI initiatives and so many things that the administration has done. And so earlier you said that, hey, this is going to be coming out, in maybe fourth quarter of 2025. We need to keep our eye on the ball. While a lot of the things that Michael and I have talked about in this book, and it was funny, I sent it to our bank, and they almost sent it out as their Christmas gift to all their folks. I wish they had. It would have been really good on the book sales. What we've seen in the new administration recently, a lot of people are saying, guys, did you have like a time capsule and you could see forward how these things were going to change? And we've seen that, and it's incredible. If you read this book and you go back, and Michael and I started writing this book in October of 23, and to see so much of what we envisioned and we thought about happen in the first 90 days of this administration, it's amazing. However, what scares me is the short-sightedness of most Americans. And we see these election cycles up and down, up and down. Now, we've made tremendous strides in removing some of these, now not Michael and I, but the administration on leveling the field and looking at more meritocracy. But be aware, because once the American conscience moves back over to a different spot, these things will come back with a vengeance. This is just a very short period. And I think the biggest sell we could say is read the book and look at how many things that Michael and I talked about 2 years ago that have already been brought to the light. And that's how the average American is being affected, Dante.
Yeah, they, obviously, I think the warp speed that, really the administration is moving on is with that kind of mindset that if there's a shift, let's say in 2 years, we're going to try to do as much as we can, as quickly as we can. And you're kind of seeing that in real time. As far as ESG is concerned, it seemed, just through my research, it was kind of originated in like 2004. So, we're talking about a 20-year. It might have been on a little bit sooner than that. But this was something from the United Nations, and how did it really get adopted in some of the American policies that we have?
Well, it actually goes back even earlier than that. I'd say it goes back into probably the mid part of the 20th century. Ultimately, I think what we're talking about is control and power. And so it's wrapped up in this very nice virtue signaling present gift wrapping, right? That we want to do well and we want to do good in the world. But I think really, if you look at it, it's just another control mechanism. So these ideas originate from the United Nations. They originate from non-governmental agencies, and they originate from people that don't really care about national boundaries. Instead, these are the kind of people that get together at the World Economic Forum. It isn't important to them whether America rises or falls. To them, it's about control and power. And so it begins with a paper called Who Cares Wins. That's probably one of the original places that these ideas took hold. But the idea really is not different from communism. So ultimately, the idea is we're talking about resources and power. And so they're saying things like, well, you need to reduce your carbon footprint, or you need to change your board, or you need to pay lip service to this particular idea. The idea that they're espousing ultimately comes down to this. We can control businesses, And by virtue of controlling the businesses, we can control individuals. And we will say that you need to do certain things here. But to me, this is really just a dressed up version of communism. The idea that it's a top-down control as opposed to bottom-up, as opposed to a bottom-up governance that we have in America. So if you think about the former Soviet Union, they were also directing businesses to do certain things based on your allegiance to the government. And now that it's changed a little bit. Instead, we have certain causes, as David was alluding to, that have been popular for the last few years. However, those are on the wane. I don't think that they're going to go away. I think David is correct with this. And so we have to be eternally vigilant and make sure that no matter what particular cause or what particular rationale they have as to why you need to change the way that you govern your business, that it's not taking the power away from the business and ultimately not taking the power away from the individual.
Great answer. Obviously, ESG mandates have affected American independence as far as energy is concerned. Can you touch upon that?
You bet. When we in energy independence and how that has been affected by ESG, we know that in 2019, prior to the COVID pandemic, that when in another story in our book, a long-term third generation oil and gas operator in the Permian Basin. And for the listeners that don't know where the Permian Basin is, or what the Permian Basin is, it's the second largest in the world oil reserve. And it's basically what gives America its energy independence. There's a lot of oil fields, but the Permian Basin is the epicenter. And that is in the southwest portion of Texas. Midland is the headquarters of the Permian Basin. And then also southeastern New Mexico. That is the area that is known as the Permian Basin. Well, this individual had a third generation oil and gas company. He was doing fantastic, and he had gotten some money from private equity to help grow his business. He had the acreage, he had the wells, everything was going perfect for this operator. He gets a call one day, and the private equity company says, "Hey, we've had a big shift. The folks that are giving us our money have said we're not spending another damn dollar on hydrocarbons." And the operator goes, "Hey, we're in the hydrocarbon business, hydrocarbons being oil and gas. And how in the heck are we not going to be in the oil and gas business when we have the wells, we have these commitments to drill wells, we have the transmission lines, everything to do." And they were profitable. And he says, the private equity company says, "It doesn't matter. Our sponsors have said, don't spend another dollar on hydrocarbons." And so ultimately, this individual has to refinance, do things, and it was very detrimental to him. When you look at that, what happened in 18 and 19, ESG was coming online, and these companies absolutely, no matter how profitable they were, with the ESG scores, said, "Hey, quit investing in oil and gas." And so if you understand, for the listeners out there, you can't just shut off these giant drill rigs. You can't, because the moment you shutter the rigs or stand the rigs down, all the workers have to go find work, and they'll go some other location. They'll move back to Louisiana. They'll move back to Oklahoma. They'll go wherever they come from. And these are very, very complicated applications. And if you have a drilling commitment to put in 20 wells in the Permian Basin, that might be a $300 million funding expenditure. And it takes forever to get the leases in order. It takes forever to get the well pads created to bring the rigs in. It takes many, many, many months to get that done and completed and fracked, and then ultimately tie that energy into the pipelines so we can actually have refined products, gasoline, jet fuel, whatever comes out of that. So when Wall Street shut that down, we saw this decline in wells completed, in drilling applications, and in all things. Now, we've seen a slight rebound on that, but it is very controlled right now. So ESG policy, ESG mandates from a financing standpoint really stifled global production for the United States. We were a net exporter. We became an importer again, or a static exporter. And so we weren't moving as much product out. So what's going on in Russia? What's going on in the Middle East? What are the Saudis doing? They're not following these same mandates for ESG, and they're not seeing the reduction. they are continuing to produce. So there's a global demand in the petrodollar, a global demand in how many barrels a day are burned, a little over 100 million barrels a day that are being used globally. So if the United States is not producing them, guess what? The Saudis turn their spigot up. Venezuela does. Our sworn enemies, Iran, they turn their spigots up, and that meets that demand. But as long as the U.S. can continue to supply our amount, we'll be a net exporter. But the moment we put the ESG mandates on our energy production, and not just oil and gas, it goes to coal, it goes to all sorts of energy that we're blessed to have copious amounts of. It affects all things. For instance, we can't even get a coal, and coal is not the solution to everything. Sure. But if we need right now, we have a deficit in energy production, electrical energy production. We should be doing everything we can to get power created for electricity, not just oil and gas. Natural gas powers many power plants. Right now, China is bringing 2 massive coal-fired power plants, and I don't know the exact kilowatt amount, but 2 per week. China has an excess of electricity. China has 95% of the rare earth minerals. What does that mean? Excess electricity, rare earth minerals. They can do anything they want to do in the AI space right now. And that's a national security threat. A lot of people think that the next big Manhattan project, we all know what the Manhattan Project was in the 40s, the atomic weapons, that the AI advancements that China is going to be able to do with energy and rare earth minerals is going to surpass what the United States has. And we all know what AI is going to do for us. So by stifling all energy, it is hampering national security and financial awareness for the United States. That was a long-winded answer, wasn't it, Dante? I went a lot of places with that.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, but
well, I mean, it's just it's a mechanism. What I'm hearing from you guys is ESG really was a mechanism to kind of control businesses, and then it really, tampered. It didn't help. And so, and then you touched on AI. So I was going to lean on Michael, right? Because obviously, Michael, you have the experience in AI.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel like ESG policies are being enforced through AI? Are you starting to see some of that seeping into that industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to that. And then I'd like to talk in a moment about what David mentioned in terms of being competitive in this nation. So right now, you don't even have to play ball with the ESG folks. They can use artificial intelligence to determine what your ESG score is. And so they look at factors like your carbon usage, they look at the diversity of your board, they look at other choices that you're making regarding the environment and social justice issues. And so they're able to assign you a score. And what we learned from writing this book is that score is always worse than it should be, if you even wanted to participate in the scheme. And that's on purpose because they want you to buy in and to begin to make the type of changes that allow them to have this leverage and this control over you. Now, if you think about artificial intelligence, it's actually kind of coincided the explosion that is in the last 5 or 6 years with the rise of these ESG policies. So increasingly, it is easier to use artificial intelligence, which is essentially analyzing data and using its training sets to determine how well you are adhering to ESG mandates. And this, again, is another control mechanism. It is an intelligence that doesn't stop. It can evaluate everything that you're doing, everything that you're saying, and then use it to extort your business. And so we should be very careful about ways in which technology, which is neutral, it could be good or bad, but in this case, technology, artificial intelligence, the most powerful technology there is on the planet, is being used to determine how well you are abiding by these ESG mandates. Again, to go back to what David was mentioning before, the Trump administration is very interested in being competitive against our rival China. And so there has been a lot of emphasis on creating data centers to make sure that we do not lose pace against our rival. China's the biggest one, but of course there are other countries out there as well. And so it's very important that we do not succumb to this deindustrialization push, which is really at the heart of what all this is about. Instead, we retain our competitive edge And that means making sure that we do have the data centers, making sure that we do have the energy and the production so that we remain competitive. Because the last thing that we want in the world is to succumb to China. Because if you think about AI for just a moment, I mentioned at the top of this discussion, the social credit score. Well, for those that don't know, everyone in China has a social credit score. And this is not unlike the credit score that we have in America. If you want to buy a home, if you want to get a car, you're evaluated based on your credit decisions. Well, now imagine as if every single thing that you do in life, whether you jaywalked, whether you didn't pay your taxes, whatever, they're all being accumulated by the Chinese government, and they're using artificial intelligence right now to determine what your social credit score is. And if it gets low enough, you are locked out of society. You can't board a plane, you can't get a loan, you can't get an apartment or a house. Well, the same thing is true in America if the ESG folks get their way, whereby they're able to use AI to determine how well you're complying with their mandates. And if you do not comply, well, you can expect to not have access to capital. You can expect to even be debanked. And so the reason this is so important is that AI is here and is only going to get more powerful, and we need to make sure that we're quashing ESG for good, not just in this administration, but for future administrations as well.
Now, let me play devil's advocate a little bit. Now, if on the other side of the fence, they're going to say ESG policies allow us to make businesses accountable. ESG policies will allow us to make sure that business practices stay moral and ethical. How would you guys respond to that type of philosophy?
If I could jump
Go ahead, Michael. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, David could definitely talk about the environmental part of that, absolutely, with the accountability, because actually the fact is businesses, especially in energy sectors, David well knows, are doing their own work, their own due diligence to make sure that they are proceeding in a clean and environmentally conscious way. It's just good business. But I'd say it goes back to what America stands for and our own ethos. I think that there is a tension in America between creativity and compliance. And when we begin to force compliance on businesses, it's a stranglehold against businesses as well. It's very hard to be an entrepreneur when you have to jump through all of these bureaucratic hoops in order to have a viable business. And so, of course, we want to make sure that we live in a safe and clean place. We want to make sure that we're respecting other people's rights. But when it comes to extorting businesses and making sure that they comply, we will lose the American edge if we begin to force all of these things on these companies. Instead, in America, I think it goes back to our founding principles that we are allowed to rise and fall based on our own merits. And when you force companies to do this, it destroys our competitiveness, and ultimately, it might even destroy our way of life if this continues.
I'd like to jump in on that. And, when we look at ESG again, the three criteria, environmental criteria examines how a company performs as a steward of nature, includes factors like energy use, waste, pollution, and natural resource conservation. While we all agree those are paramount, the EPA and all states already have strict environmental laws, which are needed. We must have clean water. We must have clean air. And those are already established. I can't go dump 1,000 barrels of gasoline on my land because I don't want to pay to get. I mean, those are prisonable. Those are criminal offenses, not civil, criminal. The social criteria. Look at how a company manages the relationships with employees, suppliers, customers, and the communities where it operates. These include issues like DEI, human rights, and labor practices. As an owner of a business for the last 27, almost 28 years, I know what it takes to keep top talent. I know what those pay rates are. I know how to treat folks. We're not in a situation where there's only a couple of companies that you can work for. There's lots of opportunity. Record unemployment lows right now in this country. In our city right now, it's 2.6. Many opportunities, 2.6% unemployment. So a company has to adapt and be flexible, have to offer the incentives and the perks to top-notch employees. And I often say, the government does not need to come in and tell me how to win the Super Bowl in my industry. As a coach of the team, the leader of the team, the leader of the company, I know what it takes to be profitable. If you don't adhere to these things, it's a very quick road to bankruptcy, right? So companies know how to operate. And then finally, the governance, the G in ESG, I mean, deals with a company's leadership, the executive pay, audits, internal controls, and shareholder rights. You know, as again, can I pick the team that's going to win the Super Bowl? Do I need to be told that X number of my board members need to be male or female? Do they need to have certain criteria? Everybody's my client. I don't care what color your skin is, where you go to church, what your orientation is. I want the best individuals leading my company from a governance standpoint. I don't need these ESG regulations telling me to do all these things. And it's just an additional layer of bureaucracy that is pushing us down, because we already have to take care of the environmental things. We have the laws to do that. We know what the social causes are. Should it not be the company's responsibility to make as much money as they can and pay that out in bonuses and different things? So Dante, you can go give to your cause. Michael, you can give to your cause, and David gives to his cause. Or should the company be told we have to give to this individual cause, or your score is lower? Well, who sets that? Who sets that ethos? Who sets that standard? Because Dante, I don't know what you're passionate about, but I know you're passionate about something. And with your money, you should be able to do that as you see fit. Michael, if you want to give it to your church, if I want to give it to the Little League softball team, that's all right. It shouldn't be a score measured on us. And it just rips individualism out. It destroys entrepreneurship, and it is very damaging, I think, to capitalism.
If I could add one more thing there, this goes back to the top-down approach that I was saying earlier. The fact is that we don't all agree on our ethics. Ethics are subjective, they're not objective. We have laws about things like murder and theft, but ultimately what they're talking about, these decisions are subjective. You know, we don't all feel the same way about what is the correct way to deal with our environmental concerns or the best way to run a business. And so when we have this top-down approach by these powerful individuals that don't respect nationalities, that only are acting in their own interest, they are forcing subjective values on business owners as to what they think is right. And if we don't adhere to them, like I said before, we can expect to lose capital, we can expect to even lose our business or be debanked. And so to go back to what David was mentioning earlier, of course, we want to do right by other people. We want to do right by the planet. But when we all can't agree on these subjective issues, it doesn't make any sense for another entity to tell us how to run our businesses because they know subjectively what is correct.
well
And
said.
going back, one last thing on this, when we go back, and there's a chapter in the book on this. If China is not adhering to ESG regulations, they're doing whatever they can to bring these coal-fired power plants on. They're doing whatever they can to get whatever energy. It's strip mining, and they don't follow environmental laws. We know that the environmental laws are very lax in the Middle East. We know that there are in Africa non-existent environmental laws. Venezuela, I mean, just a list. Brazil, all the Brexit companies or countries. If we're all breathing the same air, we're all dealing with the same oceans. I mean, if you're pumping out just tons and tons and tons of sulfur and different things from coal-fired power plants in China, as that moves across to the United States from the west to the east, where if I pee in the swimming pool, we're both swimming in the same water. You know, I mean, bottom line, we're all in the same fishbowl here. So it's the same earth. And some countries are being adhered to one standard while others have free reign. And those that have free reign, Russia, China, are sworn enemies. It is very concerning that if we can't operate the same and I'm not saying have a ton of coal-fired power plants, we have to have clean air, but the field has to be leveled. It has to be fair, or our enemies are gonna outpace us.
And one more thing, sorry, Dante, I didn't mean to
You're fine.
right? But let's just go back to the hypocrisy for just a mention. David just mentioned places like Saudi Arabia. If we really cared about human rights, like we're supposed to when it comes to board decisions, how come we're accepting of the ways in which other countries are not adhering to these at all? So going back to Saudi Arabia, I think it's, if not the worst, it's near the bottom as to how they treat their people, especially minorities and women. If you look at China, I mean, right now, they are torturing and imprisoning the Uyghurs as well, and so they are being able to act with impunity. Meanwhile, businesses in America are being told what to do, and so it's not being consistently enforced. It shows you the hollowness, really, of this whole ESG scheme.
I have two questions so we can wrap up. But my first question, a little bit, the title of your book was Creative Destruction. So I was curious, just how did you guys come up with that title of that book?
I'll let David go with that one.
You know what? Creative destruction is satire. It is, we are within the ESG world. We think that we're creative destruction. Let's just back up. What is creative destruction? Creative destruction is innovation. Creative destruction is moving to the next thing. So we used to have a horse and buggy. And so the creative destruction was the invention of the automobile, was the invention of the airplane. I mean, just constantly in all aspects, innovation, creative destruction is that economic satire that this is we're creating something that is destroying something. And we thought that title was so apt because we've created this ESG model hoping to make it better, but it's not. And it's trying to stifle innovation. And when you look at the title, Creative Destruction, we think we're being so clever. We think we're creating all these things that we don't need to do, but it is creating that destruction. And that is how we came up with the name. And we thought it was pretty clever too, because it stands out. And Michael, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, and if you think about the people that are behind this, they are being quite creative in their destruction of us, right? It goes back to divide and conquer. The more that you can get people arguing about these superficial things, the more that we are arguing amongst ourselves, and the richer these powerful companies are getting, while we are distracted by the next shiny thing. And so it's really important to remember that is the model right now. So many of us are fighting about small cultural, political issues, and meanwhile, the richest countries on earth and the most richest organizations are allowed to do whatever they want. Earlier we talked about environmentalism, but let us not forget that when John Kerry and the other individuals go to these meetings at the World Economic Forum, they're taking private jets. So they don't even adhere to their own policies that they're forcing upon us.
As we wrap up, the last question, I was just curious because obviously in the business that I'm in, on the day to day, it's always solution based. We're coming up with solutions. So, I wanted to lean on you guys to, as we move forward, how can individuals and businesses take to push back or create better alternatives? How can we move forward in the future? I'll let you guys go with that.
I'll start. I'll tee this one up, and Michael, you can finish it up. When Michael and I we met, it wasn't even to write a book. Michael and I never met each other in person until the book launch 2 years after we had started on this project. And as the father, both of us have boys, and we got to talking about it. And what I was seeing firsthand in the Permian Basin, and just a couple of instances in these stories that we've told you, in the book has 13 chapters, and there's multiple stories and historical references to how this has gone. There's over 220 exhaustive research data facts. So this book isn't a lot of folly or just fluff. This is truly research data on where we've been and where we're going. And so how do you fight back? You educate. Our whole entire intent when Michael and I first met on this was hopefully that people standing around the coffee pot or in the break room will go, "Hey, did you know this? I read this or I saw this in a podcast about this. Are you even familiar with this?" No, man, what is ESG? It's this acronym and it means something, but it's kind of dangerous. Check it out. And we wanted to start that conversation. We wanted to be able to inform folks, because the entire mass hysteria of climate change and all the things that are going on make everyone believe that ESG is the answer. And we if we don't have if we don't know what's going on in the world with these initiatives and why this is being pushed, then we don't have any way to push back. So number one for us was just get the message out there and have conversations like this. And with that being said, I'll let Michael finish this up, but that is number one, is to educate and communicate. It doesn't matter if you're right or left, wherever you are. This is not going to work for the United States. This is not going to work for the communities we live, because it's limiting our ability, and the powerful are getting more powerful. And Michael, I'll let you take this one home right here.
Oh, sure. Well, I agree with everything that David is saying, and I think it really comes down to a mindset shift, right? So we've been talking all along about these problems, and as David mentioned, this is not a right or a left problem. It is presented that way, in one more way to polarize us, as I mentioned before, that divide and conquer mentality, right? But the truth is, we have much more in common as people than we have differences, and we should always remember that. We should also always look into what is going on. You know, in America, I think we are a product of our own abundance. There's no way, going back to this idea of creative destruction, they were very creative in the ways that they're trying to take down America, and it's not happening, and I don't think it will happen ever, but they were very creative. And what they did was, the people that are behind this, they appealed to our good nature, our desire to do good in the world. And because we have been so abundant, we began to doubt ourselves in America. We began to believe that the problems that exist in the world are all because of us and our own greed and our own indifference to what is going on. But that is not true at all. Instead, this book and other books are meant to describe what is really going on, getting to the core of it. As David mentioned before, so many people don't even know what ESG is, and we wanted to have a conversation. We wrote it in such a way, it's filled with allegories, much like you might read in 1984 or Animal Farm, in such a way that people could easily follow these items and explain them to other people. That is another tool of the forces behind the World Economic Forum. They make things overly complicated, and we wanted to simplify them in such a way that even an 8th grader can understand the ways in which we were being misled. But the last thing that I'll mention, which I think is just as important as being informed, is to be brave. You know, the last few years have shown us that it's very easy to make people fearful, and fear can be contagious. But on the other hand, so can bravery. And if just one business owner says, you know what, I'm not going to do this, and my people aren't going to do this, that bravery can spread. And our hope is that people will read this book and say, you know what, this is a joke, this is un-American, and I'm going to be brave, and I'm not going to let this stand. That is how we begin to combat ESG and take back America.
The book is called Creative Destruction: How ESG Mandates Are Destroying Capitalism, Costing You Money, and Wrecking America. Thank you so much, Michael and David, for coming on, and I want you guys to have an epic day.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
The wise in the